Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to the Underestimate the Impact of Ethical Practice at Your Peril digital event, hosted by the Institute of Consulting. My name is Natasha, and I'm an events coordinator at CMI, and I'll shortly be handing over to Tudor to begin today's event. If you have any questions during the event, you can ask them using the live chat box to the right of your screen, and we shall answer as many as we can during the Q&A. We also have a poll that will be appearing shortly, so please do keep an eye out for that and let us know your votes. Today's session is being recorded and will be shared with you later today for those who book to attend. Now over to Tudor Barron, Innovation Leader, to begin the event.
Thank you, Natasha. Good afternoon, everyone. I would like to talk to you about ethics today, in consulting primarily. Consulting is an exciting and rewarding sector with a global economy. It attracts some of the finest minds and offers unparalleled career development, rarely seen in other employment sectors. But the high-value professional services provided by consultancy firms, however, are reflected in the fees that consultancies are charging for their services. Clients rightly, therefore, have expectations that they will get have expectations of what they will get for their investment. Those who commission the services in consultancies do so with the expectation that their needs will be met, hopefully exceeded, and they will engage and perform their duties in a professional and ethical manner. Whilst this is a laudable set of behaviors for the consulting profession, the stark realities of consulting engagement will mean that consultants are likely to be placed in situations that expose them to a type of risk which they are totally unprepared for, and that is the ethical risk. The problem with business ethics, I believe since the concept of business ethics was introduced into the apologize for this. I am on broadcasting from my phone, and I just had a little, sorry about that. Yes, so since the concept, as I said before, despite this, the ethics was introduced into businesses pilots in the 1970s. It struggled to gain traction with many businesses professionals. According to a report published at the time when the initial hype surrounding businesses ethics was probably at its highest, 90% of the US business schools were providing training in business ethics, and at least 16 businesses research centers were operating in the country. But despite this, the report went on to suggest that most managers, for most managers, the field of business ethics was largely irrelevant. Blogs on the subject of business ethics also suggest that there are still many challenges to be overcome if the average business professional is going to benefit from it. So, next slide, please. So I am Tudor Barron, a certified management consultant with 8 years experience in healthcare and life sciences. I'm also a board member of the Institute of Consulting and a member of the Worshipful Company of Management Consultants and its subsidiary, the Centre for Management Consulting Excellence. I'm also director at Barron's Consultancy, a purpose-led advisory service in healthcare and life sciences, where I provide transformational leadership to businesses and stakeholders, focusing on 4 core values, which are impact, innovation, agility, and ingenuity, to respond quickly to their most complex and critical challenges. I would like to take the opportunity, if we could move on to the next slide, please, to understand from you what the following describes you best, your current situation. So there will be an opinion poll. If we can move on to the next slide. Thank you. I'm just going to check. We seem to have 4 practicing managers, 2 hires, and 4 none of the above. That's excellent. So if we could move on to the next slide. What does ethics mean? Many people are familiar with the terms ethics, even if they do not fully understand the many theories and concepts that define the field of moral philosophy. Simply put, ethics explore concepts of right and wrong in terms of our behavior, actions, and decisions. Being ethical will ultimately mean having skills and indeed the courage to make an ethical decision when one is needed, and as a consequence, do the right thing. That said, whilst decision-making is a fundamental part of consulting, professional training programs rarely consider the ethical dimension to a situation. Ethics is not an exact science, and making an ethical decision will not just be a case of choosing what is right over what is wrong. In practice, will always be a possibility of a situation arising that will require a difficult choice to be made from a number of options, some of which might seem right from a particular viewpoint. Furthermore, when there is an obvious right answer, and that is often the case, making an ethical decision will not just pose a significant challenge, but also a potential risk. Next slide, please. So in terms of some practical consultancy ethics, the risks associated with unethical behavior are out there for everyone to see, I believe. Frequent media coverage of ethics scandals are often dramatic and sensational. They're often punitive fines and lengthy prison sentences. That now seem to be a more common outcome of the very worst cases. But I think we need to be clear. Consultants do not wake up one day and decide to be unethical. If they did, they will not last very long in this profession, which employs and recruits some of the highest caliber professionals. So what are the risks then? Well, quite simply, in the absence of proper ethical training, consultants are unlikely to recognize their actions as being unethical or being perceived as unethical by others. And that's the situation that can have very damaging consequences. For consultancy firms, litigation is always a possibility, as it is the loss of reduction of revenue. Probably the most damaging consequence for consultants and consulting firms, however, will be reputational damage. Reputations are fragile and fickle, and a concept within a business takes years to develop and yet could be lost overnight. At an individual level, the reputation of a consultant is the most important attribute they can possess. It represents their professional capital, their personal brand, but most importantly, their license to practice. Next slide, please. So, for instance, in my background is in healthcare and life sciences, where I have a formal code of ethics. I also subscribe to the codes of ethics set by CMI, IC, and ICMCI. CMI is the only chartered professional body in the UK dedicated to promoting high standards in management and leadership excellence. The code is binding on all the members. As such, it forms a critical ingredient for our value proposition. It also sends a clear message to organization that by employing CMI members, or in fact applying the code within the organization itself, they gain immediate added value. The code is also reviewed and approved by the Board of Trustees on a 3-yearly basis. So we can see there from the slide, these are the values reflected within the code. If we could move on to next slide, please. ICMCI code, just like CMI code, is strongly focused on the importance of trust and ethics. It reflects the commitment to ICMCI's values of accountability, integrity, and respect, and provides a framework to guide ethical and acceptable conduct in a way that upholds those values and ensures the high ethical and conduct expectations of the profession and the members is preserved. Next slide, please. So what if the code is breached? It's a very good question. The Complaints and Investigations Committee, CIC, as part of the CMI, has a remit to review, promote, and raise awareness of the messages within the code, both internally with the CMI and its membership committee, and also within the wider management and leadership arena. The committee also leads on investigation against members in terms of possible breach of the code. The CIC is supported by its investigation panel. Members are called upon in accordance with our complaints handling and resolution process to look at investigating formal complaints that may be made against an individual member. The CMI membership may have been taken away by Board of Trustees if a complaint, for instance, once investigated, shows an actual and significant breach of the code. The code is seen as a CMI UPS. It articulates what the Institute and its members stand for in terms of professionalism and competence. All members sign up to the code on joining CMI and restate their commitment to uphold the code on an annual basis as part of the membership renewal. Next slide, please. I'm not sure whether that's the right slide. Should it be challenges? Yes, thank you. So some of the challenges that we face are, when applying ethics as consultants, are numerous, but some of them are the conflict of interest, professional competency, different cultures, how they apply ethics. That's very important. You will see a different approach in the Western cultures, very probably different from the East. Asia, Africa, Europe, different culture, how they apply ethics, integrity, confidentiality, and professional reputation, I believe, are very important to consider. Next slide, please. So there are barriers to trust in management consulting. its results are often intangible, and the impression is that management is one of the core skills. The knowledge are often unscientific. So a reputation for ethical practice is a critical asset for consultancy firms, but it lacks the safeguards as well of the traditional professions, and so it's difficult to regulate. Next slide. So how could consultants make their clients trust them? That is a question that I believe has been on the mind of every consultant I have met. When we think about providers of professional services, what do we think about their ethics and values? Take, for instance, healthcare professionals take care of our bodies because we trust them to do the right thing. There's a recognized community of practice, the qualification and organization to call out when people don't rise up to scratch. When it comes to corporate bodies, however, clients seem to be more willing to entrust their care, if I could say that, to people who don't necessarily exist within such a framework. And these are the management consultants. The value of management consultants is hard to quantify, unlike a medical procedure where you could see the result within a certain given time. 16, please. Next slide. Whether consultants can help their clients is essentially unverifiable. There are a number of things that you could consider. Do the good thing if organizational change is a fluid, unpredictable process, and the results of consultancy interventions are incapable of objective evaluation. Have they had real consultancy knowledge? Do they have knowledge of experimental, intuitive, and unscientific? So reputation for excellent and ethical practice is a vital in a consultancy firm. Next slide, please. I would like the audience to perhaps use the chat box to answer these questions that I would like to review at the end. Consultancy has been defined as a commercialized profession. So there's two questions here. Are the clients of management consultants exposed to exceptional threats from unethical practice? And second, do market forces offer reasonable protection for clients and society against unethical practice by consultants? I'll be interested to hear your thoughts. And on the next slide, I would like to just briefly discuss about Aristotelian virtue ethics, and in terms of virtues that deeply rooted within post-Christian and pre-Christian periods, ethical behavior is moderate. I mean that between you have to aim to get things about right. There are no rules to ensure ethical actions. People can only be habituated to moral virtue in an ethical community. And post-Christian ethics, extreme self-sacrifice for the sake of others is good, and even saintly. There are often defined laws and rules that you must always obey, and each individual can and should have unethically, even in an unethical community. So the role of the community at large here plays a very important role. So on next slide, ethics in consulting. All business professionals, including, of course, consultants, should have an understanding of ethics. Many already have, but arguably the scope of the education and training often seems to focus on more popular topics. such as hospitality, bribery, and anti-competitive behavior. Those who are less fortunate will find the scope of their business ethics training cover little more than a discussion on the relative merits of Kantian ethics or Aristotle's golden mean. And yes, it means that in terms of real life ethical dilemmas, they will always do little to promote a subject that many observers comment, and sometimes in one of the following ways. Ethical concepts are too vague and cannot be related to business. Ethical concepts are understood, but the course of action is not clear. Or ethical concepts are not communicated in a language that people understand. These could also be barriers. Many of the critics of business ethics suggest that the subject often occupies a rather elevated moral position and bears little resemblance to the real problems that are facing the majority of business professionals. And this is also a growing belief that too much emphasis is placed on theorizing around concepts and ethics rather than providing a guidance and tools to help business professionals apply ethical concepts. Slide 22, please. Habituating consultants to ethical practices should be their leaders' top priority and concern. Consultants become disposed to behave ethically when their leaders take responsibility for making that happen. And it all goes to the character of each individual consultant is to maintain a safeguard for their clients and key strategic assets of the consultancy firm. Next slide, please. Could we go to the future of consultancy ethics? Yes, thank you. So the consulting profession is very different from other professions such as medicine and law, in the sense that it's not regulated. If it is to remain that way, the organizations and individuals within it will need to demonstrate that they are capable of providing what they can to act ethically themselves. Ethics and the professional behaviors that are associated with it are now becoming key differentiators within business. Many customers now expect their suppliers to demonstrate ethical behavior, and in a growing number of cases state precisely how they maintain an ethical culture within their organization. Ethics must no longer be thought as just as a marketing tool that has no real influence on the culture of the organization, but I believe instead to represent a fundamental set of repeatable behaviors that should be met by all consultants regardless of the roles and grade. How well consultancy firms respond to the challenge will reflect on the consultancy profession as a whole. If there was ever a need of consulting ethics, it must surely be now. Next slide, please. So in summary, I would like the audience to take away these three questions. What are the three things to take away from today, from this presentation? What are the most significant ethical issues that you face, and how do you overcome them? Next slide, please. Any questions and answer? Thank you.
Hi, Judah. So we do have some questions that were pre-submitted. So do you have examples of embedding ethical practice within complex and agile projects?
I think working with organizations, large and small, they tend to be numerous, whether they happen to be HR issues, whether they happen to be strategic issues in terms of acquiring a new business. It's quite a broad spectrum. Whereas as a consultant, you will need to balance that. And when I suppose when you met with a decision that could potentially disfavor someone, but it will help a business, then you will need to make the right decision, and you will need to have this code embedded in order to help you, to enable you to advise accordingly.
That's great, thank you. So we do have time for more questions. So what has been the biggest challenge to maintaining your values in your work?
It's I think there were a few challenges. There still are. First of all, not just being in the UK, for instance. I have Germanic background, so I had to work a little bit harder to convince or to prove myself, if I could put it like this, and be trusted in what I said and advised. These challenges in terms of perceived characteristics as well, and so on. But ultimately, I believe the age was a factor most of the time, because people would expect you to have certain years of experience in a certain field in order to be able to give advice. And I suspect that is the case for quite a lot of young consultants. But ultimately, if you are able to dissect a problem and bring value to your clients, they will immediately see and hopefully remove some of that bias that happens to be around.
That's wonderful, thank you. And we've had a question coming live that says, can you give examples of ethical risk or dilemma from your own consultancy experience in the healthcare sector, and how did you deal with it?
There are several risks that I met with in terms of operational procedures and so on. Going for certain systems that does not necessarily consider confidentiality, and in terms of operations, this is my area where I advise mostly. I always look at the safety element and operating within the framework set by the regulators. So there will always be companies that would want to promote a product or an item that could be used effectively in healthcare, but without considering some of these ethical issues around cultures, for instance, around confidentiality, and sometimes practicality. So many people come with suggestions and ideas are great. I think innovation is what we need, but we need to balance that with the code of ethics that we have. So we're not looking at the business element, but we're also considering, or we're not looking only at the business element, but we're also considering the consequences and effects of those actions.
And do you think that culture has a part to play in ethics? Do you think that your ethics might change depending on which cultures you're dealing with?
Absolutely. I think culture is so important. If you are to look at a Western culture, what I describe as West, which probably includes Germany, Switzerland, Austria, some of the countries that are heavily using consultants, US, UK, there seems to be a certain culture, a sense of fairness to do what's morally right. But that's not probably at the moment completely embedded across the board. And I think there's still a lot of work that needs to happen And I believe that if communities at large will, as I said, Aristotle was mentioning in his thesis, community plays an important role. So being the pioneers, being part of the CMI, being part of the IC and ICMCI, and promoting those values, I think is very important. Other countries will see, other cultures will see the value of it, and hopefully will adopt more widely. But I do strongly believe that.
That's great. And if you had to give one tip to anyone who's joined us today, just one thing that they could take away from this event, what would it be?
I think always look for what is morally right. What if it doesn't feel right? It probably isn't. Many a times we are in situations where we advise clients on certain things, on projects, whether that's expanding or whether that's strategy. Always look at what feels right and look for what is morally correct to do. And of course, there are various interpretations of that. We all have different understanding of what is right, but I think overall, if it doesn't feel right, it probably isn't.
I think that's a perfect takeaway for this event. So we have finished a little bit early, so you're welcome to obviously stay on and network with each other, have a chat. But that is it for today's session. Thank you to everyone who joined us, and thank you, Tudor, for your insights and expertise. And thank you for bearing with us while we had some technical issues at the beginning there.
Yeah.
Don't forget, if you're a member of IC, you can log into Consulting Direct using the link in the live chat, and you can find a wide range of exclusive and practical development resources and much more. We will be sharing the slides after the event, so those will be with you probably later this afternoon.
Okay.
If you're not yet a member, you can join our community via the link that's also in the live chat to gain full access to our Consulting Direct portal. So thank you again for joining us, and enjoy the rest of your day.
Thank you so much, Natasha. And I'm happy to take any further questions and connect with the audience.
That's brilliant. We'll include your LinkedIn profile when we send out the information, so that if anyone can, if they want to, they can connect with you via LinkedIn.
Perfect. Wonderful. Thank you so much for your time today.